like that. So if you want to leverage your own built-in protection mechanisms that are more than just getting a value, you might want to invoke the property or the getter explicitly itself. So which is best? It really depends. Just make sure this is a conscious decision that you've made. And I will say throughout Apple's code, even though there's a bit of a overhead in calling the method, Apple is increasingly just call the property, like just avoid making potential mistakes. So that would not be bad form to just say self.name, self.age. Certainly as the, frankly, phones get faster and faster, quibbling over how you access a property is really not all that interesting an argument anymore. Questions? Yeah?
So now that you're encapsulating the method of create
OK.
an object, can you do fast enumeration on those objects and say, I want to call greet on all these different students?
You can. So what about fast enumeration and greet? You can. So because students is already an array, fast enumeration, it refers to the process of iteratively grabbing the next student in the object. It's kind of independent of the idea of greet. So you could still use fast enumeration, and then inside the loop, just say open bracket, close bracket, s space greet. So you would use this syntax inside of the tight loop.
And the s will be changing as you go.
Exactly. So fast enumeration only refers to, in this context, the updating of that pointer. Has nothing to do with what's inside the curly braces of the for loop. So where we're going, not to, well, this will get you excited. After break, we will make our own ATM that looks a little something like this, that allows you to deposit money and see your balance and do arithmetic. And it will allow us to have a conversation about how to actually wire up applications slightly slowly, that it will look like this, your very first actual iPhone app. So let's take our 5-minute break here. All right, so now we actually start to dive into the IDE of Xcode and actually making some applications using UIKit and the various user interface widgets that come with it. There's going to be a little bit more new jargon. So again, as before, just honestly, interject if you have any questions, confusions, if I go too fast or too slow. And what I'll do is try to give you a bit of a tour of one or more of the templates, which are interesting in that they are most likely going to be your own starting point, but useful to tease apart verbally so that you understand exactly what has been wired up for you so that you know how all the magic is working. So with that said, and then we'll conclude with the ATM example by doing that a little more manually. So if I load up Xcode and create a new project, recall that you get this interface here. Just be careful not to accidentally start with a Mac OS application, because it will look very different. You want something from under iOS. Almost always it will be application category. Here are the various templates of rapid verbal tour. Master detail application typically has some kind of hierarchy, like a list of options. You click on it, slides to the left or so forth. In the iPad might look like the mail application if you've used an iPad. OpenGL game is a very sexy graphical game, assuming you write it to be sexy. A page-based application is sort of like iBooks, where you can side scroll and it kind of peels over to reveal the next page. Single view application is pretty boring. It's just a single rectangle, and it's up to you to populate it. That's what we'll use, for instance, for the ATM. And it's also a very useful starting point because it's a clean slate, very little magic pre-wired for you. Tabbed application has the tabs at the bottom of the screen that change what the UI is. Utility application is one of these things where you push a button and the UI flips around and shows some settings, usually on the background, and then flips back around. If you have an iPhone, it's like the weather app or the stock application. And then empty application really does nothing for you, almost to a fault now. So typically you want to start with at least single view application or similar. Yeah?
Can you combine features with multiple templates in one application?
Oh, absolutely. You can combine all of these features. These are not mutually exclusive. They are just boilerplate code that you can then add to, subtract from. It's just meant to get you started a little more easily. And these two are a moving target. They've changed significantly since the last version of Xcode. So again, buyer beware with older textbooks or online resources. So let me choose single view application. Click Next. I'm going to give it a name of Demo. Recall that company identifier can be anything. Just choose something unique. It can be edu.harvard or whatnot. Class prefix we'll leave alone. Device family. I'll generally just talk about iPhones because, frankly, it just fits a little more nicely on the screen. But everything we talk about can equally apply to iPads. And as I said, you can make multiple views so that your device is universal and that it works on both. Storyboards we'll come back to, but they refer to this idea of dragging and dropping and drawing a picture folder and then adding code to dictate how X transitions to Y, use ARC, automatic reference counting. Do this. This will automatically do memory management for you now. Again, in a couple weeks, we'll tease apart what this really means and why it's now a good thing for in general. And unit tests will also come back to this idea of being able to test your code in small bytes. So the only one for now that you should really check is ARC. All right, so I'm going to click Next. Again, I can check Git repository if you want to do version control, so I'll go ahead and do that. For now, I'm just going to go ahead and save this demo folder on my desktop. So I'm going to click Create, and voila, now I have the template. So as you begin, I would encourage you initially at least hide as much stuff as you can. So at the top right, there's all these icons that let you hide things. Just minimize distractions, because frankly, even this is still a little overwhelming at first glance. But let me go ahead and zoom in at top left. And here are the files and groups that we have by default. So let's pluck off the easy ones first that we can ignore. Toward the bottom is products, which is a group. It's a folder that contains nothing at the moment. It's red because my app doesn't exist. I haven't compiled it, but it's going to end up there. It doesn't matter that it's there. It's going to be automatically transferred to the iPhone. You don't have to double click it or the like. Frameworks. This is similar. This is like the linker flag in GCC -L, so that you can link against these various frameworks. You still have to do import at the top of the file, but that just includes the header file. This allows you to link against those files. So if you get adventurous, especially for Project 3, and want to use maps or video or other fundamental libraries, frameworks in the iOS SDK, you might have to right-click on frameworks and add other frameworks there. Otherwise, you'll get compilation errors if it just doesn't know what you mean by UI map kit to do some Google Map type thing. All right, supporting files. Let's also nix some of these as uninteresting. A plist is a property list. This is a whole collection of key value pairs. Underneath the hood, it's an XML file. But this is like settings for your application. For now, the defaults are fine. But among the things you can change here are like, what do you want? Do you want the clock to show or not? Do you want what orientations do you want to support sometimes, so that you can do that in code and elsewhere. So those kinds of lower level details. .strings. We won't use this just for now, but this allows you to have translations of your program. So that if you want to have Spanish support, French support, Chinese support, and the like, it allows you, and a lot of languages support this, it allows you to write a string like quote unquote hello in your code, but before that string is displayed on the screen, a lookup happens in this file, and if the user setting is for Chinese or for Spanish or the like, rather than quote unquote hello being returned, the value of hello for that particular language is returned. So localization is relatively easy, and frankly, for those of you interested in startups and the like, and you want to commercialize your application, this is the sort of thing, do it now. Write your code in a way that you've localized your strings. It's super simple. You call a single method that calls a macro, really, that has a comma-separated list of a name and a comment, and it allows you to have this layer of indirection. Slight inefficiency, arguably, but worth it rather than having to change hundreds of lines of code or thousands in 6 months.
In the previous file you showed,
Mm-hmm.
can you add settings to that?
Yes, you can, simply by right-clicking and choosing Add Row. Yes.
That would be like if you want like a universal kind of setting for your application.
Correct. Although if you want some universal settings for your app, you would probably not use the default one, which is really SDK specific, and just create your own preferences.plist file and then isolate it to your own application. Demo prefix.pch. This is a precompiled header. This is, again, a file that pretty much gets automatically appended to the top of all of your files just to make sure you have access to certain things. Rarely, if ever, will you have to touch that file. Don't delete it, but it's there. So I mention all of these really so that you can cross off your mental list things that you need to care about just now. Lastly, main.m. Surprisingly, this too, you don't really need to care about. It exists. It imports UIKit, because we're making a GUI app now. App delegate, we'll see what that means in a moment. Here's the main method, and it apparently returns UI application main ... That's it. Rarely, if ever, should you have to touch the main method. It exists to bootstrap the whole process, because Objective-C is built on C, so you need a main function. But all of the magic is going to happen in other files. So generally, never touch this file, but know that it exists. All right, any questions on all the stuff you can ignore for now? All right, good. So let's hide this, hide this, hide this. Look how simple iPhone programming is getting. All right, so what actually now is happening? So when you click Run, let's see what this thing does. I'm going to go ahead and hit Command-R, and the progress bar is going to compile. It's going to launch. The simulator, depending on the speed of your computer, this might happen slower or faster. That's a single view application. Out of the box, no code changes, nothing. That's what you get. Now I can click all day long. It's not going to do anything. But there's the rectangle that I promised, a generic gray box filling the whole UI window. So we can start populating this with some stuff. But let's just do a simple demo. So here's my viewController.nib. Even though it's XIB, people say nib. I don't know what a view controller is yet. We'll tease that apart. I'm ignoring app delegate for the moment. But let's just actually add something to our palette here. So it's hard to see on the projector, but this background here is like graph paper. So it helps you size things and lay things out. If I want to add some widgets to this thing, let me expose the right-hand view. And as I mentioned a week or so ago, this is where Apple hid all of the otherwise complex stuff. At the bottom here, notice that we have a whole list of objects. And there's some fun stuff here, right? There's a label, there's a button, there's one of these toggles, text fields, sliders, switches, progress views, page control, all of the little fancy widgets you have seen on iPhones or equivalently Android and the like. You can drag and drop them. From here, realize that there's menus here for objects and other different things. So if you get confused, just kind of click around until you see what you're looking for. For instance, this is just a list of classes. If you want to instantiate one of these classes in a certain way, this is frankly, this is useless. This is like if you forget the syntax of the language, you can drag and drop this and remind yourself. This is where you can play movies, or drag and drop movies at least. So I'm going to click on the little one that looks like a generic object, this cube, and let me go to the label. And I'm just going to drag and drop the label. Now, this is not iPhone programming per se, but it's one way of just expediting the process. All of this could be done in code, and that's what we'll do eventually anyway. So here's this label. I'm just going to say hello. If I want to change the aesthetics, I can click it. Then up here, there's all these things called inspectors. I always forget what the icons means, but if you hover over it, this is the file inspector at left. This is the quick help inspector, identity inspector, attributes, size, and connections. This one's actually super useful. This quick help, when you're in code mode, if you click on almost any variable or function these days, you'll see a little cheat sheet on the right-hand side that reminds you what it is, what its usage is, what its parameters are. So there actually is some really compelling features of the IDE. I'm going to care about the attributes for now. And notice this is like Microsoft Word style tweaks that you can make to the aesthetics. I'm going to go ahead and increase the font size by clicking that a little bit here. I'll go ahead and let me click on the background, change the background to, let's say, other. Let's go ahead and choose, let's say, some crayon colors. We'll do lavender. And OK. So now proof that I'm actually making an iPhone app. So let me save it. Command R to recompile it. And with it, this nib file. As an aside, a nib file is just, all right, I didn't make the box big enough. A nib file is just an XML file. Though it's, all right, ... Next time we'll see what the rest of the sentence says. So what is a nib file? So if you open it with a text editor, the XIB file, it's just an XML file. It is not an XML file you should ever touch manually or edit because there's crazy constants in there and arbitrary values. It's just a way of representing this drag and drop GUI interface. And the idea is that it can just expedite creating an interface so that you don't have to do everything in code. Frankly, it's very tedious in code to have to say, I want this text area to be 17 pixels by 34 pixels and positioned up. It's just very tedious. You can do it, and sometimes it's better because it just gives you more control and you don't have to hide details with this drag and drop interface. But initially, this is a useful way to get started, certainly for the simplest of applications. So let's now close the demo application and go into the code and what was happening here. So the first file to talk about, and almost all of the templates have a file called this, appdelegate.h and .m. This is really the guy that's in charge of the program. When main is called, and it calls that UI application main function, that effectively hands control of the entire device off to this class, an object of this class that's created for you. So in the header file here, notice a couple of things. In app delegate, the guy in charge imports the UIKit header, so you can do stuff with GUIs. It imports, actually doesn't import, there's this keyword, class view controller. So this is just one, I think this is the last real new piece of syntax today. At class is kind of like a function prototype. in that it's a hint to the compiler. This class exists. You might not have imported it yet. You'll eventually see it. But just so you don't freak out, here's the name of it, so I can mention it later as I do down here. All right, so next up is @interface app delegate. So UI responder is an Apple-made class whose purpose in life is to respond to things. And for now, let's oversimplify this by saying the app delegate, because it's in charge of the whole program, surely it's got to be